Sorry for the interruption. This is recorded session number 2. We can begin now with Professor Krishna opening the talk for this second session. Thank you.
Do you have any announcements to make, or shall I start?
I think it's worth mentioning that, Professor, you had some interruption with your internet today. So we might, have some more interruptions during the sessions today. Apart from that, I think there is a slight change in the schedule. The next session that we will have on Saturday for India and Friday for the Western countries, and that in that Professor will be talking about the his association with Krishnamurti, and some people had raised interest in that. So a professor will be talking about that, and we will shift the rest of the chapters from the session to the next day as per the schedule. So that's about it. Hope that makes sense. And if you have questions, we can clarify that over the email. So that's it, sir. We can go ahead.
Rohan, you will send the modified schedule to everybody?
Yes, sir. I have sent it already as a reminder email, and everyone should have it. Yes.
Yeah. I'd just like to mention that some people expressed that they were looking forward to the talk about K as I knew him, and were a bit disappointed that it didn't take place yesterday. So we have scheduled it on the 15th of May, which is next Saturday. Today's talk will be as scheduled, which is about a brief summary of Krishnamurti's teaching. It's a vast teaching. There are more than 80 books containing dialogues, question-answer sessions, and so on, covering almost every topic concerning our life. But it is good sometimes to look at the mountain from a distance. You get a bird's eye view of the whole mountain, and you see the beauty of the mountain, which you don't see when you go near. What you see is the trees there and the animals there and the nature of the ground and insects and so on, which is the detail. But it's good also to look at the mountain from a distance, and both of them are reality. So I'm saying that as a metaphor to this attempt to look at Krishnamurti's teachings as a whole and summarize them briefly. Because I feel that the entire teaching rests on certain basic pillars of the teaching, and then the rest is the scaffolding that is built on these pillars. So I'm going to talk about the main pillars of his teaching, according to me. The first is his statement that you are the world, meaning that the world is the way it is because we are the way we are. Not the world in the sense of the universe, but in the sense of our society on earth, and maybe including the environment, which is also dependent on how we treat it. Now there is tremendous order everywhere in the universe. Order meaning that things happen according to certain natural laws. Order doesn't mean that those laws will always support us, and sometimes they are harmful to us and sometimes they support us. Like right now, the internet has backed off, but there was no intention on the part of nature to either help us or damage us. And that order, cosmic order, functions in our body too. 10,000 things happen just rightly in our body, and all that we do is eat some food and take some exercise. So it's a tremendous order. And when it goes wrong, then there is a cause why it goes wrong. And the doctors diagnose the cause and treat it, and then you return back to health, which is order. Now, Krishnaji is pointing out that a similar thing is true about our consciousness. That there is a lot of disorder in our consciousness created by our own thoughts, imagination, memory, and that is all our own doing. It is not part of nature. It manifests as all the negative emotions in our consciousness. Anger, jealousy, attachment, possessiveness, the entire gamut of the ego and its manifestation. Those are not part of nature. They result from our own approach, which is illusory. Illusory meaning we think that that approach is that approach is beneficial to us, but in reality it is not beneficial to us. So that's an illusion. The ego is an illusion because everything can be done egoistically and the same thing can be done non-egoistically with love. It comes from the motive with which you are acting. And because the disorder comes from illusion, that is why it can be ended. You can't end a natural fact. The tree out there is not the creation of my mind or my approach. I can't end it. It is part of nature as I am, my body is. But in my consciousness, there are a lot of illusions, and from those illusions, there arise this disorder in consciousness. And then that disorder in consciousness projects itself in my relationships. And millions of such relationships constitute what we call society. So there is an intricate connection between the state of our consciousness and the state of our society. That's why many of the problems never get resolved by external means of control or agreements and so on. They keep on breaking down because the cause inside the consciousness has not been resolved. If we look at war, for example, or the division between Hindus and Muslims and so on, it sometimes manifests at the physical level in rioting and war and so on. But even when it doesn't have that major physical manifestation, there is psychological warfare all the time going on between the two communities. There is suspicion, there is doubt, there is fear, there is competition, rivalry, and so on. So that's the psychological cause, and that's the root cause of the division between the two communities. You can now expand that to two nationalities or two religions in the world. In fact, we have had more killing and wars in the name of religion than even for property or territory. That's what our history shows. So we think that joining a particular religion and identifying with it gives us a sense of community, a certain peace and feeling of security in belonging to that religion. But actually it creates this division between different religions, which becomes a travesty of all security, creates the greatest insecurity in the world. So the cause is in our psyche, and the governments are always trying to solve it at the external level of manifestation. You can suppress it to some extent externally, but it will manifest again. If you stop it in one direction, it will burst out in another direction. So if we want any kind of fundamental transformation of society, then you have to address that at the level of consciousness. This is what it means that you are the world. I'll narrate one incident which is significant in this connection. When Mahatma Gandhi was shot dead on 30th January 1948, 1 or 2 days later, Krishnamurti was giving talks in Bombay. And at the end of his talk, somebody asked him, "Sir, who was responsible for the murder of Gandhi?" And he gave a long reply. You can read it in the collected works or on internet, but I'll paraphrase it. He said, "Each one of you who is divided from his fellow man on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste, on the basis of nationality, is responsible for that murder." Now the law considers that only the man who pulled the trigger, his name was Godse, was responsible, and they hanged him. But if you inquire more deeply, Godse was not born a murderer. He was born in this society, and he grew up in this society, and his mind was conditioned by the environment of the society, which included religious division and so on. So his mind got infected with all those divisions, that conditioning, and that eventually led to his hatred of Gandhi and the murder. So who is responsible for making him into a murderer when he was not born as a murderer? That means there was no genetically something wrong with him. That environment is created by all of us, you and me. We create the education, we create these states and divisions and all that. So all of us, according to Krishnamurti, are responsible for the state of our society and our world. And therefore, we need to take responsibility and not contribute to this division and so on, which requires that we must free ourselves of our conditioning. Because so long as you identify with either your country or your religion or your race, whites and blacks and so on, or an ideology, like communism or capitalism and so on. You create a division. That means you don't have a global mind. You are not concerned with the whole of the earth and all that is there on earth. You identify yourself with a fragment of the earth, and then that creates this feeling of we and they. So we have to understand this division psychologically, which is our own doing. It's not nature's doing. It's our own doing. Right now, this is going on in the United States. There are people who are angry with the South Asians and Far Eastern, who are immigrants there. And they hate them and they are killing them, attacking them. That division comes from this feeling that this is our country and these are outsiders, foreigners. So what is an outsider? How does our mind define an outsider and an insider? How does it create those boundaries? So the boundaries between nations are not there on the earth. They are in our minds. If I have to come to America, I have to go to Delhi, get a visa, and then come. But the breeze blows and the birds go through. The animals can go through. But we human beings are dangerous species, therefore we are stopped, we are checked, which is right. But why are we dangerous species? Because we have created this whole disorder in consciousness, division and so on. So Krishnamurti said, unless you work for the transformation of consciousness of man, which is yourself, you are the world, this will never change. And indeed, it has not changed. In the last 3,000 years, all that we know in history, we have always been divided and always been at war. Actually, rationally, it is so simple. We can all just decide that if we have a problem, we will take it to an international court and resolve it there and agree to arbitration. We won't use violence and war. That's what we do within our country. Why are we not able to extend it internationally? Just because we have all these divisions in our mind and our consciousness. So that is what the root cause of the disorder in consciousness of this kind of violence. There are other disorders coming from other illusions in the conditioning, like the idea that women must be assistants to men and that they are subservient, that man is superior, and so on, which are all just notions. In India, somebody started casteism, divided people into 4 different castes. Some were held superior, some were inferior. 3,000 years ago, we don't even know why he did that. But today it has become a major division in society, and people don't intermarry across castes. And so there are caste riots, caste division, etc. All the consequences of it follow. So what I'm trying to say is that this is what Krishnaji pointed out, that our problems all originate, small as well as large, all problems originate in our psyche and then manifest externally. Of course, the outer is related to the inner because the child grows up watching the outer, and his mind gets infected in all this conditioning. And then he maintains that conditioning, and therefore the division continues, which is a tremendous inertia in society. The same thing continues. Now, unless you question that, Unless you go beyond that, unless you perceive the danger of that, you will never get out of it, which is what has happened. And no amount of external effort, either economic or legal or judiciary and police force and so on, those are all ways of controlling the manifestation. They don't remove the cause of the problem. So you see that the problems keep recurring in Kashmir, the problems between blacks and whites, the problems that we are seeing in Africa, in the Middle East, between Arabs and Jews, they keep recurring because the root cause has not been handled. So Krishnamurti is pointing out the root cause is the disorder in our consciousness. And the disorder in our society is a manifestation of the disorder in our consciousness. Therefore, it is our responsibility, each one of us has to work at it and eliminate this disorder. And it can be eliminated because it originates from illusions, which are imaginary things. How does an illusion end? When you discern what is true and what is false for yourself with a learning mind, then the false ends. So you need to question your own opinions, which are your conditioning, and not just accept them. But when we are egoistic, we are very attached to our own opinions, our own family, our own culture, our own country, and so on. And so long as you are identified like that, all this is inevitable. So you are the world. That's one great truth that he pointed out. The second pillar of his teaching is the statement that virtue cannot be practiced. Yesterday, someone raised that question, and I said we'll take it up today. So let me elaborate on it a little. All religions are prescribed what is virtue and what is vice at the level of actions, virtuous actions and wrong actions. And in all religions, human beings have tried to use their will to follow their religion, their teacher. At the end of it, we are seeing what we are seeing in the world today. As violence ended, in spite of all the talk of non-violence and all the talk of show your other cheek also, no. First, sermonizing and telling people what to do, what not to do, doesn't work. At least doesn't work in deeper things. It may work in very superficial things like how to go to the railway station and so on. So we have to ask ourselves why it doesn't work. After all, Jesus said, love thy neighbor. We agree with that, very good idea. Why doesn't it become a reality? Because there is not that love in your consciousness. There is this division. There is a measurement and evaluation, and on the basis of that, you decide whether to make friends with him or not. So all that process destroys love. And unless you are free from that process, it can never become a reality that love the other person. Gandhi and Thoreau and so on, they prescribed non-violence. Have people become non-violent? If you define non-violence only as not hitting somebody, then yes, maybe its manifestation can be controlled to some extent by your will. But why do you feel like hitting somebody? Because you hate him. Isn't that hatred already violence in consciousness? So unless there is order in consciousness, there is not really virtue. And this was pointed out by Socrates long ago, 2000 years ago, that there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. Because love, compassion, non-violence, ending of violence is all order. And that order is virtue. But it is destroyed by the disorder. And the disorder comes from this illusory approach to life, giving importance to the self and its own security, independent of all the others, not realizing that we are intimately connected with all the others. And therefore, there is no such thing as individual liberation and individual freedom and so on. The Buddha said, ignorance is the cause of sorrow. Ignorance not as lack of knowledge, but as illusion. And illusion is something that is just created by our mind, by our thinking. And we accept that kind of thinking, and it becomes a fact for us. It's not a fact of nature. So it's not really true. It's false, but it becomes true because you accept it. That's why it is important to investigate, to inquire, to find out. That inquiry, as we said yesterday, is not just an intellectual inquiry. It is an existential inquiry through observation, through sensitivity, which includes all the senses. And that we have not been trained to do. We have been trained, highly trained, only in the intellect. Our intellect has been highly trained, but our sensory perceptions have not been really trained holistically. That's why Krishnamurti wanted to change education, because something is fundamentally wrong with the way we are growing up. To acknowledge that is the beginning of learning. But to be proud of that, to be sure of that, means it will never change. So that's why you have to see this connection between our consciousness, the way we are approaching life, and the consequences of it in society. Then you feel responsible for everything that happens in society. It's not the responsibility of only the people in that area or those who are connected with it, as we think. It's the responsibility of all of us, humanity. So when you say one will practice virtue, which has been prescribed, find out what you can do with your decision and what you cannot do with your decision. And you will find that our decision works in very superficial things. You can decide what to wear, what to eat, what house to live in, and so on. But can you decide not to worry from tomorrow? Can you decide to be happy from tomorrow? Can you decide to love? Can you decide to be peaceful? So the greatest things in life are not those that come from decision. They are a byproduct of our understanding of ourselves. That understanding is called self-knowledge, because you can't get it from a book. What you can get from a book or a teacher is knowledge, not self-knowledge. That's what it means that you have to be a light unto yourself, that there is no guru who can give you, who can end your illusions and that disorder in your consciousness. You have to take the responsibility of that for yourself. And your learning is entirely your responsibility. Nobody else can do it for you. Now there has been this, leads me to the third pillar of his teaching, that you cannot really follow another. Because what does it mean, I am a follower of Jesus Christ? You can go to the church, you can perform the rituals, because all that you can decide on. But that's not the teaching of Christ. Jesus Christ said, when you are hit on one cheek, show your other cheek also. Which means when somebody harms you, don't return that with violence, with harm. Which means don't hate your enemies. Now, how will you eliminate hatred from your heart? Can you decide to do that? You can't decide, because there is a whole psychological process behind it, which occurs in your mind, and that is what creates the hatred. Unless that process is dismantled, the hatred won't go. Your decision doesn't work. And that is the reason virtue cannot be practiced. Virtue is a state of being, which doesn't mean you should not become vegetarian or give alms to the beggar. That's not being said. You can do that. But that in itself is not kindness and compassion in consciousness. If you come upon kindness and compassion in your consciousness, it will manifest in all relationships and all aspects of your life. But when you decide only on certain actions which you think are compassionate and kind, you will perform those actions, but elsewhere you can be extremely cruel. And this has been observed. Even a man like Hitler was a vegetarian. Now, vegetarianism by itself is kind to animals, but he was the most cruel man the 20th century knew of. So, virtue cannot be practiced. It's a state of mind, a state of consciousness, and it is order in consciousness. And it can come about only by ending the disorder, because our own mind creates the disorder. So that's the third pillar of his teaching. The fourth is that you cannot really follow a wise man. It's related to the previous one. Because what does it mean you are a follower? If I become a follower of Gandhi, I can take goat's milk, I can wear khadi, I can sleep like him, I can eat like him. Those things are within the capacity of your decision. But that's not the great thing about Gandhi. He did not hate his enemies. How will you eliminate that hatred in your heart? So without coming upon the wisdom which is there in the teacher, it has no meaning that I am the follower of so-and-so. This is not a recent discovery. In the 17th century, a Japanese philosopher called Basho pointed this out. He said, don't follow the wise. Follow the wisdom which they acquired. That means acquire the wisdom which they acquired. Don't just follow their words and their admonition, because that has repeatedly been found to fail. The notion that some people will do this religious inquiry, come upon a different consciousness, and then tell us how to live, and we will live accordingly. They will give us the rules by which we live. You are not able to follow what they are saying. And it creates a hypocrisy. I mean, if you say, I must love my neighbor, you can take flowers to your neighbor and you can smile every morning and say good morning. That's within your power. But inwardly, you may be very critical, you may be very upset with him, in which case it becomes hypocritical. You don't really love him, but you are saying, pretending that you love him. So practice, conscious practice of virtue is not virtue. It has to come naturally, and it can come naturally when it's part of your being. Conscious acts of goodness are not real goodness. And this is what Krishnamurti taught. So what to do? We are conditioned. There is disorder in consciousness. We can't follow the wise. We can't take decisions, and we can only control the disorder to some extent, but we can't eliminate it by decision. So what to do? What to do to come upon transformation of consciousness? And that is the next pillar. He says, don't judge, don't condemn, don't justify. Just watch with passive awareness, with a learning mind. How do you learn? How does a scientist learn about the planets and so on? He watches. He just watches the phenomenon, records what is taking place, and a deeper understanding devolves after he has watched for a long time, attentively. That's how all scientific discoveries have been made. And Krishnamurti is suggesting something very similar. He's saying, watch the anger, watch the jealousy, don't suppress it, don't try to control it. Watch it and learn about it. It's an opportunity to learn about yourself, because there is a whole process operating within you that makes this manifestation happen in your consciousness. And if you don't understand it, you will never get rid of it. You will have to keep on fighting it. And that's not a religious life, to be fighting with oneself all the time. So how do I come to it? And that for that, you have to end the illusions in the mind, because the disorder comes from the illusion. The illusion that the other man is not myself, different from me, and therefore the hatred comes. Get rid of the illusion, and then you will see that the other man is yourself. Then there is no hatred. So it is a quest for truth. And that's why the quest for truth is the highest religion. That's what the Theosophists said too. The motto of the Theosophical Society is that truth is higher than any religion. But we don't have the truth. What we know is all these illusions, and the conditioning is containing all that. So you have to learn about yourself by watching with an inquiring, curious, observant, attentive mind, sensitive mind. But we never do that, because we make some ideals and we have some results in mind, and we want to achieve those results quickly, which is what we call ambition. And then you are only interested in doing that which takes you in that direction of ambition, fulfillment of the ambition. So you don't watch anything else. If you don't watch your child attentively, you don't watch nature attentively, you will become insensitive. And that's what has happened. Human beings have become extremely insensitive. And that's why they constantly seek pleasure. In the next, not the next now, but next but one talk, we will discuss this when in the lecture on the pursuit of happiness. Because eventually, of course, all human beings are wanting to be happy. So are all the animals. It's a natural urge to be happy. But Because of all these illusions, we are going about it the wrong way. And you have to understand the difference between pleasure and joy. Joy is natural. The joy in seeing the beauty of nature, the joy in meeting a friend, the joy in playing a game, the joy in growing a garden. There is great joy in every aspect of life. And that is sensitivity. That's perception of beauty. And we have lost it because we have a one-track mind going only wanting to go in a particular direction, whether the direction of your office or promotion or success or money, whatever you have made for yourself. And therefore we are bored human beings and the entire entertainment industry comes up to capitalize on it and make money, because you need to constantly escape from boredom. So you have to ask yourself, what is boredom? Why am I bored? After all, there is the tree, the river around the corner. There is the neighbor's child, even if you don't have your own child. There is the dog around the corner. There is the newspaper. There are so many things. And what is boredom? One is not interested in any of this. Why? Why am I not interested in any of this? Because I'm all the time seeking strong pleasures. So one has to understand this whole process of boredom and desire and all that. And that's what we will do in the next chapter of the book, called The Pursuit of Happiness. So what is this learning mind? How do I learn about myself? First of all, to know that we don't know. If you think you know, you have stopped learning. You have stopped listening. You are only politely listening to someone till you can put forth your own view, but you are not really considering what he is saying because you are not interested in it. You have already made up your mind. So the knowledge blocks us. And that's why yesterday I made this paradoxical statement that the knowledge of Krishnamurti's teaching is a barrier to Krishnamurti's teaching. Because you think you know, but you don't really know. You don't know the truth, but you know only the words and the meanings of those words. And you think that is the truth. It is not the truth. Truth is at the level of perception, and you have to investigate much deeper. Krishna said you have to stay with the question, and the question will reveal the beauty. But you don't stay with the question. We are too eager to get to an answer, and the answer stops the inquiry before you come upon the realization. So that's another cardinal truth that he pointed out, that the intellectual understanding of the truth is not the same thing as the realization of the truth. The realization means as real as the danger of fire or the danger. You don't need arguments. You don't need anybody else to tell you that there is that danger. You know it because you sense the danger. But here you don't sense the danger of the ego. Therefore, there is all this temptation. Temptation means what? It means the mind is not clear. If you saw it as a danger, there would be no temptation. But you don't see it. You only know that the Pope said this or your father said this, and therefore you have a fear. But you have this temptation. So there is conflict going on within you. That conflict indicates a lack of understanding, a lack of clarity in the mind. And therefore, one needs to work on it and find out from where this confusion is arising and clear it up. That is self-knowledge. It's a very practical thing. It's not something very philosophic, out of this world, and so on. And when you do that and you learn about yourself, you end the illusions. It transforms consciousness. For example, if you discover for yourself that comparing yourself with others is just a disease of your mind, it produces this division, it produces hierarchy, it produces envy, jealousy, inferiority, superiority, all of which are disorders in consciousness, starting from comparing and measuring and comparing yourself with others. Why does the mind do that when it produces so much complication in your life? Because we are ignorant. We don't realize that. The propaganda says you must be the best, you must be ahead, you must compete, and so on. That becomes your conditioning. And that destroys brotherhood. That creates this rivalry, jealousy, disorder in consciousness. So one has to question all that, use all that to understand the source of all this within oneself. And once you understand, all real change is a byproduct of understanding. It is not a byproduct of our effort or our control or our will. The will doesn't have a role here. The will has a role in the material world. But over here, in the religious realm, the will is a problem. It is the essence of the ego, the will. And the ending of the ego is ultimate redemption, because the ego creates all these illusions. It is the maker of all these illusions, the source of all these illusions, including the divisions, the war, everything. If you trace it back, you will find that it starts with the ego process. So I'll end it here. That, to my mind, is the overall picture that comes from Krishnamurti's teachings, that we are the world. So long as we continue to be the way we are, the world cannot change in any big fundamental sense. You may change the economy a little, you may change the laws, you may make better roads and so on, but those are not the real problems. You don't need still better computers and still better aeroplanes and so on. And that's the direction in which all the major effort is going on, because it's all about money and economy, not about learning about oneself. So humanity has not really understood the value of learning about oneself and this transformation of consciousness. But it's an essential requirement. The other day, I heard Radhika Herzberger give a talk in which she mentioned that it's like a chariot with two horses. One is a stallion, a steed which moves very rapidly and fast. That is our being as the intellect and ambition and all that. And the second is just a foal, which is all this self-knowledge and the understanding of yourself and so on. So the chariot won't run when one of it is rapidly moving, and the other, which represents wisdom, is lame. It can't run. I think that's a good metaphor. You need both. You need both. Both must be active and so on. So that we will take it up in the chapter on education. Krishnaji has not spoken against knowledge. He has said that this ability to use knowledge efficiently is important and schools must nurture that. But far more important than that is to nurture this inquiry of self-knowledge and sensitivity. Thank you. I'll end it here and we can have some discussion.
Thank you so much, sir. So there is a question from Meenakshi ji. She's asking, I think in the spirit of learning about oneself, what is the difference between value and virtue?
If you're talking of moral values, that's what is meant by virtue, virtuous action. But virtue, as defined by Krishnamurti, is order in consciousness, and also by Socrates and some of the sages, Buddha. It is order in consciousness. It is not just limited to a set of actions, which doesn't mean you must not perform beneficial actions. But the motive with which you perform is more important than the action itself. If you are performing it egoistically so that you will be known, you will have name and fame and so on, you are contributing to the ego and the disorder in the world, which is a much bigger problem than the problem you are solving. You may be building a hospital which will treat patients and that will do good to patients. But if you are doing it ambitiously, you are also contributing to violence. Because when an ambitious man is interrupted, he becomes violent. He fights. So you have to understand this, that ambition has been proclaimed as a great virtue. But if you examine its consequences, you will see that violence comes out of it. The most violent human beings have been the most ambitious in history. I'm reminded of a dialogue between Alexander and a sage called Diogenes in Greece. He was venturing out on his effort to win more and more territory all over the world, which was his ambition. But before venturing out, he goes to Diogenes and he wants to take his advice. So he says, I'm going to attack Iran and I'm going to win and occupy Iran. Diogenes says, what will you do after that? So he says, after that, I'll take Iraq. What will you do after that? After that, I'll take Afghanistan. What will you do after that? He said, after that, I will attack India and take India. He said, what will you do after that? He said, after that, maybe I'll come home. So Diogenes asked him, why don't you do that now? So that's how wisdom differs from ambition.
Thank you, sir. So Gunasekharan had this comment, awareness is a challenge. Trying to be aware is not a usage, is that not a usage of willpower? I think you went into that sufficiently, that it is a byproduct of understanding and not matter of willpower. Maybe you want to comment on it.
He's talking about trying to be aware.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to be aware is not awareness. It's a willful process. Awareness requires a witnessing consciousness, a learning mind. When you are trying to understand something, that is not an egoistic activity. But when you are trying to achieve something, it is an egoistic activity. So if you are trying to achieve awareness and maintain it constantly and so on, then you are interfering in what is taking place. Through your will, through your thought, you are the problem. You are not the solution. That's an illusion that we have, that we can solve these problems. No, you are not separate from the problem. You are the creator of the problem. Let's look at that a little bit, because that's an important part of his teaching. I get angry. And I say to myself, I should not be angry. So I use my willpower to suppress the anger, which means what? I have divided myself into two parts. One part which is producing the anger, and the other part which is saying, don't be angry, and therefore trying to suppress it. Actually speaking, the two parts are the same person. They are within you. The anger is not separate from you. It's not like an infection that comes from outside, and then you can diagnose the infection, treat it, get rid of it, and you survive. No. Anger is not an infection like that. Your own approach to life is producing that anger. Your own illusions in the mind is producing that anger. And if you don't dissolve them, you only separate yourself from this happening. You only create more complication. You create conflict within yourself. And this constant battle between one aspect of you and another aspect of you, which is saying, don't do this, that is not a religious life. Therefore, it's not freedom. So self-knowledge is freedom, leads to freedom from the problem, not just control of the problem. It involves no will. The desire to understand is not egoistic. That's part of curiosity. Curiosity is innately there. All science, art, music, everything is born out of this innate curiosity which is there in human consciousness. It's not always directed towards a result. It's just there in us. Inquiry is part of us. Of course, there is also an inquiry to achieve an end. That's different. That's an egoistic inquiry. But all inquiry is not egoistic. There is an interesting incident of this in science. When Faraday discovered electromagnetism, he discovered that the field of electricity and the field of magnetism are connected to each other. They are not independent fields as it was thought till then. And he demonstrated that by taking a coiled wire, connecting it to a galvanometer, which measures the electric current, and pushing a magnet towards the wire, so that the magnetic field connected with the wire was changing. And that produced an electric current in the wire, which was recorded by the galvanometer. And he demonstrated this in a large hall, in an audience. And somebody at the back of the hall asked at the end of the talk, all this is very well, but of what use is this? And he said his answer, which has become a great saying in the annals of the history of science, was, it's a newborn child. Of what use is a newborn child? So all this internet, electricity, everything came out of that discovery. But he was not making that discovery in order to give you electricity. He was doing it just because he wanted to understand nature, what's going on. So the real science comes out of that learning mind, not the application of science. The application of science is what engineers and so on do. That depends on what you want to do. If you hate your neighbor and you want to kill him, you make a gun, or you make a bomb, or you want to make war, you make a nuclear bomb. But science is just discovering the truth for its own sake, just to understand nature. And that's not by itself an egoistic activity. When it is directed by an egoistic activity, it becomes egoistic. So the ego always comes from the manner in which we are approaching the activity. You can do the same activity without the ego, and you can do it egoistically.
Thank you, sir. So Rajesh ji and Meenakshi ji both are asking about what is truth or what is fact, and is it truth or is it reality or anything else?
Ordinarily, we think that a correct statement or a correct description, we call that the truth. But that's not the religious truth. Religious truth, in the sense in which we are using it here, or Krishnaji has used it, is at the level of perception without distortion. So when you perceive what is, namely the fact, or if you like to call that reality, depends on what meaning you give to that word, because the existence of illusion is also a fact in the mind, though the illusion is not a fact. The illusion is just a construct. It's not a fact in nature. So in Buddhism, it was said to look at something as it is. In Hindi, jas ka tas dekhna. To see something as it is, which means not to project anything from your consciousness onto it, which means it requires freedom from conditioning, because it's your conditioning that projects into your observation and produces a mixed reaction between what you are seeing. It contains a lot of your prejudices and so on, what you are noticing. So real, true perception, the perception of truth, is when the mind is free from conditioning. Conditioning is not interfering with the perception. That's what it means, truth here.
Sir, a related question down below, Rajiv ji is also asking to see the truth in the false and the false as the false. Could you explain that?
Yeah, these truths are not very concrete. They are fairly nebulous. And so you can't, Krishnaji went to the extent of saying that the truth cannot be described. It is so subtle that language is incapable of precisely telling you what the truth is or conveying to you what the truth is. It cannot be described in words, but it can be perceived. That is why it is necessary to perceive it for oneself and not just conjecture and analysis and arguments and so on, reasoning. That is a conclusion. It is not the truth. The truth is at the level of perception. It's only this direct perception which is called insight. And insight transforms consciousness, not knowledge. The rest is all knowledge. The argument, the analysis is all in the field of knowledge. Not that there's anything wrong in doing that, so long as you don't mistake it for insight.
So there are several questions regarding the consciousness and its content. So I'll try to summarize it best I can. The practice, will the practice of the action level virtuous activities make the difference in consciousness over time? That's first one of them. And then someone is talking about the contents of the consciousness, how to know that jealousy, competition, hatred are signs of disorder in consciousness, and love is the order in consciousness. There is one more. How my single consciousness can change the world.
Ron, can you read one at a time? Because I find it difficult to keep all of them in my memory.
Sorry about that, sir. So yes, the first one is, Will the practice of virtuous activities make difference in consciousness over time?
It can, provided you are doing it with a learning mind. That is not an egoistic mind. But if you are doing it with an egoistic mind, it will not bring you to freedom from the ego or freedom from the illusion, because the ego is the creator of all illusions. It may destroy one illusion and it will create another illusion. You will become proud of your achievement and so on. So it won't remove the disorder, it may change the nature of the disorder in the consciousness. But if you are doing it with a learning mind, it is not, the problem is not at the level of what you do or what you don't do. The problem is at the level of illusion or no illusion. You can go into a temple and pray. You can go into a church and do your ceremony. If you have no illusion associated with that activity, there is nothing wrong, no problem with that activity. You can go into the church, listen to the beauty of the ceremony and the music, see the architecture and the beauty of the church. Absolutely fine. But then when you come out with an idea that now I have become virtuous because I did this ceremony, that's an illusion. You have not become virtuous. Nothing has changed in your consciousness, but you are imagining it. Similarly, the Hindus go and take a dip in the Ganges, and they feel that they have washed off their sins. They have been told so by their religion, or at least some religious teachers, because they regard it as a sacred river. Now, there is nothing wrong about taking a bath in a river. When the sun is rising, to go into a river, take a bath there, wonderful. No problem with the action. But the notion that your sins have been washed away is the illusion associated with it. It's the illusion that creates the complication. You don't know what sin is. You don't know if water can wash away the sins. What does it mean that my sins have been washed away? Does it mean there is a clean slate and I can start all over again? So if you don't inquire, it becomes a stupid thing that you are doing. But nothing wrong with the action part itself. The same is true of sex. It's neither right nor wrong. It is just a biological activity. But the mind creates a feeling of right and wrong, shame, and do this, don't do this, I should not have done it, and all that kind of thing. It's all at the level of the psyche and the mind. So the complication is always coming from our own mind, our own consciousness. And that's what we have to understand. It's not at the level of action. So it is not that you should not do something. I mean, it's not correct to say that Krishnaji said, don't practice any technique. He did not say that. He just said, through practice of technique, you cannot come upon the truth or upon the religious mind. It is true. But he's not saying don't practice. He was practicing yoga every day, 2 hours and pranayama. But no illusion associated with it. He never said that in order to come upon enlightenment, you have to do this. So if there is no illusion with it, there is no problem. The problem is always the illusion in the mind, not the activity. That's how I understand all this. Krishnaji has not said in such detail, but when I'm investigating his teaching, my mind tells me this. Take it with a pinch of salt. I'm nobody.
Yes, sir. So Parth is asking, related to that, how to understand that jealousy, competition, and hatred are signs of disorder in consciousness, and love is the order in consciousness.
Well, you feel the pain of it, don't you? When your wife goes out with somebody else and you feel jealous, you feel the pain of it. You don't have to analyze it. You sense it. It is there. What is that pain? The idea that she belongs to me. Does another human being belong to you? You buy her in the market. It's like your chair, somebody is taking it away, or your cow. So there are a lot of questions in that. What is jealousy? What is possessiveness? All that is part of the ego, coming from the ego. Otherwise, it's just friendship. In friendship, if your friend goes to meet another friend, you don't feel jealous. But when your wife goes to meet somebody else, you are scared. You are scared she might develop a relationship there and leave you and go away. So all that fear and so on, all that is the ego. So it's very easy to notice the disorder in consciousness because it creates pain, psychological pain, not physical pain. Eventually, psychological pain translates also as physical pain. That's what the doctors say, that the stress in the mind creates even body aches and illness and so on, because it lowers your immunity. Because body and mind are not completely independent of each other. We separate them only for the sake of talking, but they are related to each other, as are thought and feeling. They are not really separate from each other. Thought changes feeling, and feelings change your thought. So it's always thought feeling. But language has this. I mean, when you're talking about something, you have to define it, that is it thought or is it feeling? You classify it. Which is why Krishna says, don't name it, just see the actuality. The actuality is thought feeling. But when you name it, you want to call it thought or feeling, it's already not describing the truth. It's fragmentary. That sort of is a good example for the previous question, which asked why truth cannot be defined and stated.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. So you're saying the jealousy, competition, hatred, these words, these are just the words, but as long as you respect the feelings that you have, you know what it is. And you don't have to define it into a formula that it is a disorder.
No, if you are looking at it with a learning mind, you will discover that your own approach is causing all this. And that the pain is not coming from outside. Not that pain is coming because your wife is going with somebody else, but the pain is being created by your own mind within you. I often give the example, which is easier to understand, of playing a game. If you're all the time measuring, comparing, competing, wanting to win, it becomes an egoistic approach. And then all the faults of the ego will come into it. That is, you will feel disappointed if you lose. You will feel proud if you win. You will feel like cheating if the umpire is not looking. All of which, all these vices will arise because you are approaching it egoistically and somehow you want to win. So the important thing is not the joy of playing, but the important thing is the joy of victory, winning over the other person. That comes from competition, if you are approaching it competition. If you are not approaching it like that, if you think the joy of playing is really important, and you go and play, which is what we do when it's just a hobby, you enjoy playing the game, even if you lose. Indeed, if you lose, you admire the opponent and you say, I want to play more with you. I want to learn. You play so well. There is no jealousy, there is no frustration, there is a desire to learn. So it becomes completely different, though at the activity level, it's the same. You're going and playing a game with some friend. So your approach determines what will happen within you. That's why you have to learn what is the right approach to things in life. And all psychological pain, which is disorder, comes from a wrong approach. So it's telling me, Krishna, you are approaching life wrongly. Find out where is the error, correct it. But if I don't have a learning mind, I just cry and I berate myself and I strike the racket on the ground and say it was the fault of the racket, it didn't hit the ball correctly, and so on. You see that with tennis players and all that in the games which we watch. So it all depends on how you are approaching it. If you approach the game egoistically, it produces all that. If you don't approach it egoistically, it produces none of those negative emotions. Now, having said that, ask yourself, if a game can be played non-egoistically, isn't a whole of life also like a game? It can be played non-egoistically, or it can be played egoistically. It's up to you.
Thank you, sir. So there are several more questions. I'm not so sure if we can get through all of them. The next one is from Urmiji. It's an interesting one.
We said we will take up one by one until the time is there. But we'll respect the time also.
Yes, sir. So the next question is from Urmiji. She is asking,
if there is a question which you feel has been more or less already answered, you can skip it.
Yes, sir, surely. So this question is, can genetic disorder like short temper, anger, be gotten rid of?
Well, you would have to find out whether it's really genetic or it is psychological. If it is genetic, it's like the tiger eating the goat. Nature has fixed that as its food, and he's eating the goat. It is not cruelty. And he just eats his food and then he's not destroying all the goats. He just eats that one goat. When his stomach is full, he goes off. He doesn't hate all the goats. The complication comes in the case of a human being. You're not satisfied with killing one soldier of the enemy. You don't eat him. You create hatred for his whole tribe and you want to destroy the whole tribe. So that is what is the consequence of the ego. So you have to distinguish between the instinct which is there. You have to distinguish between sexuality as an instinct and sexuality as lust and greed and domination and rape and all that.
Sir, someone is asking a very different question here. Is there no individual liberation? Why Hindu philosophy puts lots of stress on moksha? Would you like to comment on that?
Well, you have to ask the Hindus. I am not an advocate for Hinduism. I don't know why they said that. I'm not the person to answer that question.
Yes, sir. So Shamal Raoji is asking, he's also saying the non-violence has been a more successful tool to achieve practical or political ends than bringing transformation or order in individuals' consciousness. That is his statement. And have we given non-violence the status of an ideal and hence unachievable?
There is real non-violence only when violence has been ended. Non-violence is a concept. It's not a fact. Violence is the fact. In our consciousness, there is violence. If you have ended the violence through self-knowledge, where is the need to practice non-violence? Then you are non-violent, that's it. There's nothing to practice. You don't need a will to practice that because there is no violence. That's transformation. But when you are violent, when you are hateful, you call about practice of non-violence as merely not hitting somebody, not bringing the manifestation at the physical level, not killing anybody, not hitting anybody, and so on. So Krishnaji used to say that social morality is immorality. That means it permits a certain amount of wrong. But if it becomes more, then you object to it. So you can dominate on your wife, you can taunt her, it's okay. But if you hit her, it's not okay. Then you will be taken to court and punished and all that. So social morality is just about containing the level of the manifestation. And that's not at the level of consciousness at all. So social morality is really allowing immorality up to a certain extent. Similarly, he questioned, everyone is talking about ending nuclear war. Why not all war? Because everyone is afraid that nuclear war will mean I'll also get killed. It will mean the whole of the earth and all the species may be destroyed and so on. So you are worried about that. Therefore, you want to end nuclear war. But you don't want to end all war because so long as our country is winning and getting territory and subjugating the others, it's okay. So that's social morality. Social morality is immorality.
So this may be a last question. This is from Prakashji. It's more of a general question. He's asking, what does it mean to stay with the question?
It means exactly what it says. That is, don't quickly seek to find an answer. The answer puts an end to the question. Living with the question and observing the question, observing with a question in your mind, sharpens the observation. It makes you detect many things which you don't detect otherwise. Let me give you an example. You observe a cloud going by, beautiful, breeze is blowing, nice, and so on. There is no learning taking place. But when you ask a question, why does this cloud move? Then you notice that, well, the breeze is blowing, that's why the cloud moves. Why does the breeze blow? Well, because there is a temperature difference, a pressure difference, which causes the breeze to blow. Why is there a temperature difference? And so you go back to the sun and the sea and so on. So like that, you are learning a lot and observing a lot more than what you would have observed if you just got entertained by the movement of the cloud, which is also observation. So the question sharpens your capacity for observation, and you derive much more learning when you do it with a question rather than just observing. I mean, you can just observe anger and say, yes, I am angry. Then nothing will happen. Your anger won't reduce or change or anything. It's a wrong concept. So Krishnaji laid tremendous importance on inquiry. And he said it's hard work. It's hard work because you have to stay with the question and observe attentively for a long time till you get a deep insight. You don't know when you will get an insight. But if you are in a hurry to get an answer, you will get an answer before you find the truth. And if you are satisfied with it, your inquiry ends. So that becomes another illusion. Finding the answer and getting satisfied is another illusion. You have not really come upon the truth. That's what Achyutji pointed out when he said, people don't know how many tears I have shed that I didn't have this facility with words. Because words have a way of making you feel you have understood when you have not understood. There's great, deep truth in that.
Thank you, sir. We have about 3 to 4 minutes more. There are no more questions. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about individual responsibility, as that's one of the questions that whirling around my mind. So, if you don't know.
Sure. You see, if you understand that the disorder in society is coming from the disorder in our consciousness, not only yours, but so many people, millions of people. But the consciousness of man is one. The other man's consciousness is not different from yours in any very significant way. He has also desire, he has fear, he has conflict, he has ego, all that. It may manifest a little differently. His desires may be different from your desires. His fears may be different from your fears, but we all have fear. We all have. So we share a common consciousness. When you understand your own consciousness, you understand the consciousness of humanity. So it's not really only a selfish individual pursuit. Just as in science, when you discover a law with your experiment in the laboratory, that law applies all over the universe. You have discovered a law of nature, even though it was in your particular laboratory. Similarly, our consciousness is the laboratory because that's what we have access to, and that's what you can watch. I can't watch your consciousness. But when I discover some deep truth about my consciousness, it is the same as the truth about your consciousness and that of all other human beings. So it is both, the looking is at the individual level, but the perception is valid for whole of humanity.
That's wonderful, sir. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So it's about time for us to close today's session.
So we meet on 15th, and I will be speaking on Krishnamurti as I knew him, which was scheduled for yesterday, but I skipped that. So we'll schedule it on 15th. And Rohan has already sent to all of you the modified timetable or schedule.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
So the date may be different for people in different countries, but yeah, we meet in 6 days from now.
15th in India, 14th evening in 14th evening in California, and 15th early morning in Europe.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, everyone.
But everybody can watch these things at their convenient time on YouTube because it's all recorded there and will stay there.
Yes. Yeah. All sessions will be there for all.
Yeah. So people in Europe can also watch, but maybe not live session. Yeah.